We also ask about China in this survey, and have for many years. And this is comparing the median view in 25 countries, which is the number of countries we surveyed this year. Favorable, unfavorable views of China versus favorable, unfavorable views of the U.S. People have a slightly more favorable view of the U.S. globally, but regionally there are real differences. We ask people who plays a more important role in the world today compared to 10 years ago. 31% of the people in the 25 countries say it's the U.S., 70% say it's China. So I think there's a strong recognition that China plays a more important role than it does 10 years ago. And that's not saying that they play a more important role in the U.S., it's just that they play a more important role than they did 10 years ago. We ask people every year, who's the world's leading economic power? This year, people say it's the United States. I can tell you at the depths of the recession, they said it was China. So this is a question where the response varies year to year almost, depending on kind of economic perception of the two economic powers. What is interesting is that given the very low favorability of the U.S. and the confidence in the U.S. president, especially in Europe, but also in Latin America, and the mixed results in Asia, when you posit to the global public, well, who would you like to be the leading world power, China or the United States? So it's one or the other. You can't say your own country, you can't say Europe, you can't say Japan. Basically, overwhelmingly still people say we would like the U.S. to be the world's leading. And remember, this is after we've asked them and they've said, oh, the U.S. is acting more unilaterally, the U.S. is not engaged in global problem solving the way it used to be. Nevertheless, if we have to choose, we would prefer the United States over China. A couple of other questions on U.S. soft power. This is a question we've asked periodically. Who respects the personal freedoms of its own people? Half the public says the U.S. Only 1 in 5 people say China respects the personal freedoms of its own people. I can tell you, though, that this soft power indicator in Europe in particular has collapsed. For years, it was about 3/4 of Europeans said America respects the personal freedoms of its own people. Then you had the NSA scandal. Then you had Black Lives Matter in Ferguson. And then you had Trump. And basically, from a European perspective, it's just gone downhill. And now less than half, only about 1/3 to 40% of Europeans, depending on the country, say that the U.S. protects the personal freedoms of its own people. So you can do damage to your soft power. And remember, that damage started under Obama, not just Trump. This is this question on the world's leading economic power. Basically, it's the South Koreans and the Japanese who are most likely to say that the U.S. is the world's leading economic power. But notice that in Europe and in Africa, Canada even, people say China is the world's leading economic power. The Germans, half of Germans say that China is the world's leading economic power. Notice that no one said Europe and Japan are the world's leading economic power. Although I love the fact that 21% of Germans said the EU was the world's leading economic power. And that's like 4 or 5 times what anybody else says about Europe. And you got to believe the Germans were thinking, well, when we say Europe, we really mean Germany. This is that response to that question, who would be better leading the world? Asians, by very large majorities, say that they would prefer U.S. leadership over Chinese leadership.